Helga Weber looked down at the glazed circle on her breakfast plate with pure disdain. Her 3 weeks at Camp Alona, Iowa had been full of unexpected things: plentiful meals, spotless living quarters, and courteous treatment. However, this particular food item was an affront to her refined taste as a professionally trained pastry chef from Vienna. "What is this supposed to be? This toy bread?" she inquired of Sergeant Louise Patterson, the supervisor of the mess hall, gesturing toward the donut with her fork. "That's a donut, ma'am. Made fresh this morning with a sugar glaze. It's one of America's favorite breakfast foods." All around the dining area, 30 German women who were prisoners of war looked at the unfamiliar pastries. Their expressions varied from simple curiosity to outright scorn. Most of them had been captured while serving in military hospitals in France and had been moved to American custody only a few months prior. "It resembles a child's plaything," remarked Ingrid, who used to own a cafe in Munich. "In Germany, we have proper pastries. Strudel, Linzer Torte, Sachertorte. This is laughable." A number of women chuckled at her comment, and Helga, feeling encouraged by their reaction, decided to speak up. Having trained at the esteemed Café Central in Vienna before the war, she saw herself as an expert on what constituted a proper pastry. "Sergeant Patterson," Helga announced, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "in Austria we would never serve something like this, not even to our children. A pastry with a hole in the middle? It is nonsensical, and the amount of sugar is simply wasteful." The American sergeant's face remained impassive, but a flicker of something showed in her eyes. It wasn't annoyance, but rather a kind of patient amusement. "Well, ma'am, I suppose you don't have to eat it if you'd rather not," she said. "But I might suggest you at least try it before you make up your mind. American donuts have been bringing smiles to people's faces for a very long time." Helga defiantly pushed the donut to the far side of her tray and turned her attention to the other food items: eggs, bacon, and coffee that, to her surprise, was quite palatable, even if it was weaker than the coffee she was used to in Germany. Around her, most of the other German women followed her lead, leaving the glazed rings untouched as they quietly ridiculed the culinary simplicity of the Americans. "Can you believe it?" whispered Greta, who was seated next to Helga. "A country with such vast resources, and they squander their sugar on coating fried dough that has holes in it. The Americans clearly have no appreciation for sophisticated baking." But as the meal went on, Helga observed something peculiar. A few of the German women, mostly the younger ones who were perhaps not as set in their culinary ways, had cautiously sampled the donuts. Their expressions shifted from doubt to pleasant surprise. One woman, whose name was Frida, was even reaching for a second one from the serving platter. "Frida," Helga called out across the table in German, "are you actually consuming that children's fare?" Frida glanced up, looking slightly sheepish. "It is actually very good, Helga. It is sweet, yes, but the dough is light and the glaze is quite nice. It's not at all what I was expecting." "It is a fried ring with sugar," Ingrid maintained. "There is no elegance, no skill involved." "Then the Americans make very delicious, simple food," Frida countered, taking a large bite of her second donut. As the mess hall began to clear out, Helga looked back at her tray. The untouched donut sat there, its glaze still gleaming in the harsh light. Her pride had stopped her from trying it. But a small voice of curiosity suggested that perhaps her judgments about American food were as mistaken as her initial judgments about the American treatment of prisoners had been. The real question was whether she possessed the courage to challenge her own deep-seated culinary biases. The next morning presented another encounter with the offending American pastries. This time the mess hall was offering 3 different kinds: glazed, chocolate frosted, and something Sergeant Patterson referred to as jelly-filled, which struck Helga as even more preposterous than the original. "Now they are putting jam inside the toy bread," Ingrid declared with a dramatic air of disgust, as if the whole wasn't ridiculous enough. But Helga could see that the atmosphere had changed since the previous day. More of the German women were now trying the donuts, and their reactions indicated that the pastries were not the culinary catastrophe she had proclaimed them to be. Frida had become a fervent advocate, showing others the proper way to eat them and explaining their appeal. "You must eat them while they are fresh and warm," Frida told a doubtful group. "The glaze melts just a little, the dough is soft, and the sweetness is actually quite enjoyable. It is not sophisticated like a Viennese pastry, but it has a charm of its own. Charm, Helga interrupted. It is fried dough with sugar. There is no technique, no artistry. Have you actually tried one? Frida asked, her question a direct challenge. A hush fell over the table as the other women turned to watch. Helga, the self-proclaimed expert, was being put on the spot for judging something she had not experienced. I do not need to taste an inferior pastry to know that it is inferior. Then you are no different from the people who judged us without knowing us, Frida responded quietly. The comparison struck a nerve more than Helga was willing to show. That afternoon, during the daily orientation, Captain Mary Sullivan addressed the food issue with surprising frankness. Ladies, I am aware that donuts are new to you. In Europe, pastries are elaborate creations that take hours to prepare. But in America, especially during a time of war, we have created simpler foods that can bring a bit of happiness without needing rare ingredients or extensive training. She pointed to a display that outlined the history of the donut. The donut, as we know it, gained popularity during the First World War, when American soldiers in Europe needed portable treats to boost their morale. They are not meant to compete with your sophisticated pastries. They have a different function. But why waste sugar on such a simple food? Helga asked, her professional pride compelling her to seek answers. Because joy does not always require complexity, Mrs. Weber. Sometimes, the simplest pleasures are the most gratifying. After the session, Sergeant Patterson approached Helga with an unexpected proposal. Mrs. Weber, I hear you were a professional pastry chef in Vienna. Yes, I trained at Café Central for 5 years before the war. Well, ma'am, I would like to invite you to our kitchen tomorrow to show you how we properly make donuts. Perhaps you will understand them better if you see the process from a baker's perspective. The invitation was a clever one, appealing to Helga's professional identity, while giving her a way to learn about the despised food without losing face. She paused for a moment, then agreed. I will come, but I cannot promise that I will change my opinion. Fair enough, ma'am. Fair enough. That evening, Helga lay on her bunk, listening to the other women talk about the donuts with increasingly favorable opinions. The conversation had shifted from ridicule to appreciation, and she felt her status as the voice of European sophistication slipping away. The chocolate ones are actually quite delicious, someone admitted. I had 3 of the jelly-filled ones at lunch, confessed another. Did anyone else notice that the American staff makes them fresh 3 times a day? Greta asked. That is more attention than we ever gave to prison food in Germany. Helga touched her stomach, feeling the now familiar sensation of being well fed after months of German wartime rationing. The Americans provided their prisoners with better food than most German civilians were eating, and their supposedly childish donuts were part of a food program that was, quite literally, saving lives through its abundance. The question was no longer about whether American donuts were sophisticated. It was about whether Helga's pride would stop her from admitting that sophistication was not the only thing that made food good. Her visit to the camp kitchen at dawn was a revelation of organized skill. Helga had been expecting a rudimentary setup focused on producing large quantities of food with little regard for quality. Instead, she discovered a professionally run facility that would have met even the high standards of Vienna. Welcome to my world, Sergeant Patterson said with clear pride, gesturing around the spotless kitchen. We prepare 3 meals and 2 snacks every day for 200 prisoners and 60 staff members. Everything is made from scratch, including the donuts. Helga examined the setup with a professional's eye. Commercial-grade fryers, multiple workstations, neatly organized ingredient storage, and equipment that was superior to what Café Central had owned even before the war. This is impressive, she conceded, her voice tinged with reluctance. Thank you, ma'am. Now let me demonstrate how we make proper American donuts. Patterson gathered the ingredients with practiced efficiency: flour, sugar, eggs, milk, butter, yeast, and a variety of flavorings. Helga watched intently, her baker's instincts kicking in as she analyzed the proportions and methods. The key, Patterson explained, is to get the dough's consistency just right. If it's too dense, the donuts are heavy. If it's too light, they fall apart in the fryer. You have to find that perfect balance. And the whole? What is its purpose? It's for practical reasons. It ensures they cook evenly all the way through. A solid center would still be raw when the outside is done. Patterson began to knead the dough with expert hands. Plus, it has become our signature. Americans instantly recognized that shape. As the dough rested, Patterson prepared various toppings: a simple glaze, chocolate frosting, cinnamon sugar, and fruit fillings. Each required its own technique and precise timing. You see, Mrs. Weber, donuts might appear simple, but making them correctly demands real skill. Temperature control, timing, consistency, all the things that distinguish a good baker from a mediocre one. Helga watched as Patterson shaped the dough, cut out perfect circles with their distinctive holes, and gently placed them into oil heated to a precise temperature. The transformation was fascinating to watch. Raw dough became golden, puffy rings in a matter of minutes. The temperature is critical, Patterson went on. 375 degrees. If it's too hot, they will burn on the outside while remaining raw inside. If it's too cool, they will soak up the oil and become greasy. When the first batch came out, perfectly golden and aromatic, Patterson immediately coated them with glaze while they were still hot. The glaze melted onto the surface, creating the shiny finish that Helga had dismissed as childish. Now, Mrs. Weber, I would like you to try this while it is fresh. Judge it as a baker, not as a European who assumes American food is inferior. Patterson handed her a still warm glazed donut. The surface was glistening and steam rose from its soft interior. The aroma was undeniably tempting, sweet with a hint of yeast and that distinct fried quality that stimulates hunger. Helga gazed at the donut, her professional pride at war with her genuine curiosity. Every part of her wanted to stand by her claim that European pastries were superior. But Patterson's clear expertise and the care she had put into the preparation deserved an honest assessment. She took a small bite. The texture was the first surprise. It was impossibly light and tender, nothing like the heavy, greasy fried dough she had imagined. The glaze added a sweetness that wasn't overwhelming, and the subtle yeast flavor gave it a complexity she hadn't expected. It was not a Sacher torta or an apple strudel, but it wasn't trying to be. It was something else entirely. A comfort food that valued joy over sophistication. Well? Patterson asked, though her expression indicated she already knew the answer. Helga found it difficult to reconcile her prejudice with the reality. It's actually quite good. It is different from European pastry, with a completely different purpose, but it is genuinely good. Patterson beamed. Mrs. Weber, I believe you have just learned an important lesson about keeping an open mind. As Helga finished the donut and accepted a chocolate-frosted one for comparison, she understood that the lesson was about more than just food. She had dismissed American culture as unsophisticated, the American treatment of prisoners as propaganda, and American food as childish. Every one of her assumptions had been proven wrong when she was confronted with the actual experience. Sergeant Patterson, she said slowly, would you be willing to teach me your techniques? And perhaps I could show you some Viennese methods. An exchange? Mrs. Weber, I would be honored. As they spent the morning baking together, American donuts and Austrian strudel side by side, Helga came to understand that sophistication and simplicity were not opposing concepts. They were different ways of achieving the same goal, creating food that brought people joy. The question now was whether she could persuade the other German women to set aside their pride long enough to discover the same truth. Word traveled quickly through Camp Alona that Helga Weber, the proud Viennese pastry chef who had been the most vocal critic of American donuts, had not only tried them, but had also spent a whole morning learning how to make them. By lunchtime, the dining hall was filled with the sound of German women debating cultural superiority and culinary authenticity.
Helga, you have forsaken European standards, Ingrid declared with a dramatic flair.
Next, you will be telling us that American coffee is better than Viennese. I am not saying anything about the coffee, Helga replied calmly, placing 2 donuts on her lunch tray. I am saying that it is foolish to dismiss a food without trying it, and I was foolish. These donuts are not trying to be a Sacher torta. They have a different purpose, and they fulfill it very well. Around them, other women watched the exchange with great interest. Helga's change of heart was significant because of her professional background. If a trained Viennese pastry chef admitted that American donuts were good, then perhaps their mockery had been unwarranted. It is the sugar and fat that make them seem appealing, Greta insisted, trying to salvage some German pride. Simple pleasures for simple tastes. Actually, said Frida, who had been won over days ago, Sergeant Patterson explained that Americans developed donuts specifically for efficiency, to provide a maximum morale boost with minimal ingredients during wartime. That is not simple. That is clever. The debate raged on throughout the day, but Helga noticed a change in behavior, even among the most stubborn women. At dinner, fewer donuts were left on the trays. By the end of the week, the kitchen had to increase its production to keep up with the demand, and the German women were even requesting their favorite kinds. "Mrs. Weber," Captain Sullivan said during a private meeting, "Sergeant Patterson informs me you have become quite an advocate for the donut." "I simply admitted that I was wrong to judge without knowledge, Captain. As a professional baker, I should have known better. Would you be interested in helping us create a baking program, teaching our staff European pastry techniques while you learn more American methods?" The offer took Helga by surprise. "You want a German prisoner to teach your staff?" "I want a skilled baker to share her knowledge. Your nationality is less important than your expertise." 2 weeks later, Helga stood before a mixed group of American staff and German prisoners, demonstrating the proper technique for a Linzer tort, while Sergeant Patterson prepared to teach them how to make an American pie. The cultural exchange was something that had never been seen before. Former enemies learning from one another in the kitchen of a prison camp. "The key to a good Linzer dough," Helga explained in her improving English, "is to keep the butter cold. Work quickly, use a light touch, and respect the ingredients. It's the same principle for a pie crust," Patterson added. "Different pastries, but the same fundamental respect for your materials." As European torts and American pies came out of the ovens side by side, Helga had a profound realization. Food had become a bridge where politics and prejudice had once built walls. Sharing techniques and expressing honest appreciation, whether for a Linzer tort or a glazed donut, created a common ground that rose above the divisions of war. That evening, the mess hall served both Viennese pastries and American donuts with dinner. Prisoners and staff alike sampled both, comparing notes and showing their appreciation for the unfamiliar flavors. "Helga," said Ingrid, finally trying her first donut after weeks of holding out, "I hate to admit it, but this is actually quite good." "I know," Helga replied with a smile. "That is what I have been trying to tell you." And as she watched the German women eagerly asking for their favorite kinds of donuts, chocolate frosted, jelly-filled cinnamon sugar, Helga knew she had witnessed a small miracle. The transformation of prejudice into appreciation, all through the simple act of honest tasting. The Americans had defeated Germany on the battlefield, but they were winning the peace with something more powerful than weapons. The patient demonstration that their food, like their culture, deserved respect rather than automatic scorn. And in the process, they taught Helga something invaluable, that true sophistication includes the wisdom to appreciate simple pleasures without demanding that they be complex. 6 months after her arrival at Camp Alona, Helga received a letter through the Red Cross that would force her to face some hard truths about her home country and her own future. Her sister, Christina, wrote from Vienna describing conditions that made life in the prison camp seem like a luxury in comparison. "We have no sugar, no butter, no flour for proper baking," Christina wrote. "The cafe closed 6 months ago. We are surviving on rationed bread and whatever vegetables we can manage to grow. Yesterday's ration was 150 grams of bread mixed with sawdust. Meanwhile, I hear you are working in an American kitchen with unlimited ingredients." Helga read the letter while having her afternoon snack, 2 fresh donuts and a cup of coffee. The contrast was devastating. She was a prisoner, yet she was eating better than free Austrian civilians. She was learning American baking techniques with ingredients that her family could only dream of. "Bad news?" Greta asked, noticing the look on Helga's face. "My sister. She is hungry in Vienna while I am gaining weight in Iowa, eating the very donuts I once ridiculed as children's food." Sergeant Patterson noticed her distress and quietly approached. "Mrs. Weber, is everything all right? My family is starving in Austria while you are feeding prisoners American pastries 3 times a day. Nothing about this is all right." Patterson sat down across from Helga, her expression full of sympathy. "Ma'am, I understand the guilt you must be feeling, but starving yourself here will not help your family." "Then what will?" "Surviving. Learning skills that might help you rebuild Austria one day, and perhaps understanding that the outcome of the war was not just a military one. It showed which system takes better care of its people." The statement was delivered gently, but its implications were staggering. Helga had been raised to believe that German and Austrian culture was superior, that European civilization was more advanced than American. Yet here she was, a prisoner with access to ingredients and techniques that her family, as free citizens, could only imagine. That afternoon, Helga made a decision that would have seemed like an act of treason just months earlier. She requested permission to write to her sister and advise her on how to apply for immigration to America. "Captain Sullivan," she said during their meeting, "I want to help my family leave Austria." "Is that possible?" "Under certain circumstances, yes. Family reunification is being considered for prisoners who show good conduct and a potential for integration. I will do whatever is necessary. My sister has 2 children. They need to eat properly, to learn skills in a country that has resources and opportunities." Over the following weeks, Helga poured all her energy into the baking exchange program with a new sense of purpose. She taught European pastry techniques while mastering American methods. She improved her English through intensive study. She demonstrated the kind of cooperation and adaptability that might help bring her family to a place of safety and abundance. "You are working very hard," Patterson observed during one of their now regular collaborations. "I am working for my family's future, and maybe," Helga paused, choosing her words with care, "maybe I am admitting that the country that defeated us understands some things better than we did." "Like donuts?" Patterson asked with a small smile. "Like taking care of people. Like abundance instead of rationing. Like treating even prisoners with dignity and teaching them valuable skills." Helga pulled a perfect batch of donuts from the fryer. "I mocked these pastries because they were not European. But now I understand that they represent something we lost in Austria. The idea that food should bring joy, that there can be enough for everyone." 6 months later, Helga stood in the camp's visiting area, embracing her sister Christina and her 2 hungry nieces, who had just arrived from Vienna. The children stared with wide eyes at the mess hall, where lunch included, among many other things, fresh donuts with chocolate frosting. "Tante Helga, what are those round cakes?" asked the youngest, her reaction echoing Helga's own on her first day. "Those?" Helga replied, selecting generous portions for each child. "Those are American donuts. I used to think they were children's food, too simple for sophisticated Europeans. But I was wrong about many things. Try them. You will love them." As she watched her nieces devour the donuts with the desperate hunger of children who had known real starvation, Helga understood that her journey from mockery to appreciation had been about more than just food. It had been about learning that cultural pride, when left unchecked, can blind you to the truths that might save your life and the lives of your family. The sophisticated Viennese pastry chef had learned to love simple American donuts, and in doing so, she had learned to appreciate the country that made them, one honest bite at a time. A year after her first taste of a donut, Helga stood in a newly created culinary training classroom at Camp Alona, teaching a mixed group of American staff and German prisoners the art of traditional Viennese pastry. On the counter beside her were 2 items that symbolized her transformation: an elaborate sachertorte and a tray of perfectly glazed donuts. "Today," she announced in confident English, "we will explore culinary philosophy. The European tradition values complexity and artistry. The American approach values efficiency and accessibility. Both are valid. Both have a purpose." Captain Sullivan watched from the doorway, taking notes for a report on successful integration programs. The baking exchange had become Camp Alona's most popular activity, with waiting lists for both prisoners and staff who wanted to learn the cross-cultural techniques. "Mrs. Weber," called out Corporal Jennifer Hayes, a young baker from Texas, "why do you think American donuts became so popular if European pastries are more sophisticated?" "Because sophistication is not the only measure of good food," Helga replied, demonstrating the donut-making technique alongside the preparation of a strudel. The Americans understood something important. Food that brings joy to the most people is better than food that impresses only a few. Sergeant Patterson, who was now Helga's co-instructor and an unlikely friend, added her own perspective. Plus, during wartime, donuts could be made quickly with the ingredients that were available. Practicality served the greater good. The statement was layered with meaning that was not lost on anyone in the room. The entire program had become a metaphor for post-war reconciliation. Former enemies could learn from each other, by acknowledging that different approaches had different strengths. As the experimental fusion pastries, combining European techniques with American efficiency, baked in the oven, Helga reflected on how far she had come from the proud Viennese chef who had mocked donuts as children's food. "Helga," said Greta, who had joined the program after her own conversion, "have you heard about the State Department's proposal?" "What proposal?" "They want to establish culinary exchange programs in Germany and Austria, teaching American food service methods while preserving European techniques. You have been recommended as the coordinator." The opportunity was unprecedented. A former enemy prisoner helping to rebuild her homeland, using knowledge she had gained in captivity, funded by the very nation that had defeated her. "I do not know if I am ready for that responsibility," Helga admitted. "You were not ready to try a donut either," Greta reminded her. "But you did, and look what happened." That evening, Helga walked along the perimeter of the camp, wrestling with her decision. Beyond the fence, the Iowa farmland stretched out to the horizon, fields that produced the abundant wheat, sugar, and dairy that made America's food generosity possible. "Mrs. Weber," Captain Sullivan had followed her outside, "I wanted to discuss the coordinator position with you before you make your decision. I am concerned about returning to Austria, Captain. My family thinks I am a collaborator for working with the Americans. How will they react if I return teaching American methods? They will be grateful. You are bringing knowledge and resources that can help rebuild their country. Helga, you have a gift for bridging cultural divides. You did it with donuts. You are doing it in the classroom. You can do it in Austria too. By teaching Austrians to make American donuts. By teaching Austrians that former enemies can offer valuable knowledge, if you are humble enough to learn from them." The timer in the training kitchen chimed, signaling that the experimental fusion pastries were ready. They walked back together, arriving just as Patterson was pulling the creations from the oven. Pastries that combined Viennese artistry with American practicality. "Perfect," Patterson announced, cutting samples for everyone present. "European technique, American mindset, the best of both worlds." As Helga tasted the fusion pastry that represented her own transformation, she realized that Captain Sullivan was right. She had spent a year building bridges in the camp kitchen. Perhaps it was time to take those bridges home to Austria. "Captain," she said, having made her decision, "I will accept the coordinator position, but I have one condition." "What is that?" "I want to bring American donut recipes to share with Austrian bakers, to show them that we prisoners learn to appreciate American food and maybe they can too." Sullivan smiled warmly. "Mrs. Weber, I think that is exactly the right approach. Food first and then everything else will follow." 3 months later, Helga stood in a temporary training facility in Vienna, teaching Austrian bakers how to make American donuts, while a batch of traditional strudel cooled on nearby racks. The juxtaposition perfectly captured the program's mission: preserving European heritage while embracing American innovation. "The dough must be elastic but not tough," Helga demonstrated, working the mixture with expert hands. The Americans perfected this technique through efficiency research, learning how to produce maximum quality with minimum time. Her students, Austrian bakers who had survived the devastation of the war, watched with expressions that mixed skepticism with desperate hope. Austria's baking industry had collapsed during the final years of the war, and these professionals were struggling to rebuild with limited resources. "Frau Weber," asked Klaus, a master baker whose shop had been destroyed in a bombing, "why should we learn American techniques? Shouldn't we be preserving Austrian traditions?" "We will do both," Helga replied, gesturing toward the strudel. "But the Americans taught me something important. Pride does not feed hungry people. Donuts do." The blunt statement challenged everything the Austrian bakers had been taught about the superiority of their craft. But as Helga pulled perfect golden donuts from the fryer and demonstrated the simple glazing technique, even the most skeptical professionals began to understand. "These could be made quickly," observed Klaus, examining the finished products, "with limited ingredients in damaged facilities for hungry customers who cannot afford elaborate pastries." Exactly. The Americans call them comfort food, something that brings joy without requiring luxury ingredients or extensive training. Over the following weeks, the program expanded as word spread about the Austrian baker, who had learned American methods in a prison camp and had returned to teach them. Local newspapers ran stories about culinary reconciliation, and several bakeries requested training in the American techniques. But success also brought complications. Not everyone approved of adopting the methods of an enemy nation, and Helga faced hostility from traditionalists who saw American food as a form of cultural contamination. "You are destroying Austrian heritage," declared Herr Schmidt, confronting Helga at a meeting of the Vienna Bakers Guild. "These donuts are an insult to centuries of Viennese pastry tradition." The room fell silent as the guild members watched the confrontation. Helga stood quietly, understanding his pain, but she was prepared to defend what she had learned. "Herr Schmidt, I trained at Café Central. I know Austrian traditions intimately, but I also know that children are hungry right now, and we do not have the resources for elaborate pastries." She pulled out photographs from Camp Alona. "These are donuts I made in an American prison camp, where I ate better than you are eating today. Is Austrian pride worth preserving at the cost of practical solutions?" Schmidt stared at the photographs, which showed an abundance of simple pastries that could feed many people efficiently. His expression shifted from anger to something approaching recognition. "The Americans fed you this well? In a prison camp? Better than that, Herr Schmidt. They taught me their techniques with patience and respect. They treated me like a colleague, not a defeated enemy. And now, I am bringing that knowledge home because Austrians deserve the same abundance." After the meeting, several guild members approached Helga privately, expressing their interest in the program. Even Schmidt eventually enrolled in the training, admitting that pragmatism had to win out over pride when people were hungry. 6 months later, American-style donuts began to appear in Vienna bakeries alongside traditional pastries. The fusion proved to be popular. The locals appreciated the affordable comfort food that didn't require expensive ingredients, while the bakers valued the efficient techniques that made the most of their limited resources. "Frau Weber," said Klaus, whose shop had reopened using the hybrid techniques, "I must tell you something. When you first returned, teaching American methods, I thought you had been brainwashed by your captors. But now I understand. You brought back knowledge that is saving our industry." "Not saving it, Klaus, evolving it. Austrian traditions remain, but we are adding new approaches that serve our current needs." That evening, Helga received a telegram from Sergeant Patterson in Iowa. "Heard about your Vienna success. American Embassy wants to expand the program throughout Europe. They are requesting you to lead the initiative. Proud of you, Louise." The message was a validation that her approach, respecting tradition while embracing innovation, was working, but it also meant potentially spending years helping former enemies rebuild, using knowledge gained through unlikely friendships in a prison camp. "Mama," her niece Anna said, entering the training facility with her school books, "Frau Schmidt from next door asked me to thank you. She says her husband is apprenticing at your program, and they can finally afford proper meals because his new job pays better." Helga smiled, watching another batch of donuts, the very food she had once mocked as childish, emerge golden and perfect from the fryer. These simple pastries were helping to rebuild Austria's economy, feeding hungry families, and proving that the knowledge of former enemies could be valuable, if only pride didn't stand in the way of learning. 5 years after her arrival at Camp Alona, Helga stood before an international culinary conference in Paris, delivering a keynote address on post-war food recovery and cultural exchange. The audience was filled with chefs, government officials, and food industry representatives from 30 nations, all rebuilding after the global conflict. "Distinguished colleagues," Helga began in fluent English and French, 5 years ago I stood in an American prison camp mocking donuts as children's food, unworthy of the sophisticated European palate. I was a Viennese pastry chef, convinced of my culture's culinary superiority." She paused, clicking to a photograph that showed her initial contemptuous reaction to the donuts at Camp Alona. "Then, Sergeant Louise Patterson invited me to actually taste what I had been mocking. That single bite taught me more about humility and cultural exchange than any lecture ever could have." In the audience, she saw Patterson herself, now retired but serving as a State Department culinary consultant, alongside Captain Sullivan Klaus from Vienna, and dozens of other people whose lives had intersected through the unlikely bridge of American donuts. The lesson was not that American food is superior to European food. The lesson was that different cultures develop different solutions to the same problem: how to bring joy through food. Europeans valued artistry and complexity. Americans valued efficiency and accessibility. Both are valuable. Both deserve respect. She clicked through slides that showed the evolution of the Vienna training program. Traditional strudel alongside modern donuts. Austrian bakers learning American techniques while teaching European methods, and the resulting fusion pastries that honored both traditions. Today, over 300 bakeries across Austria, Germany, and France use the hybrid techniques developed through this exchange. We are preserving our heritage while adopting innovations that serve our current realities. And it all started because I was humble enough to admit I was wrong about a simple glazed donut. After her speech, Helga participated in a panel discussion with Patterson, Sullivan, and representatives from other nations that were implementing similar programs. Frau Weber, a French chef, asked, "Some critics say that adopting American methods contaminates European culinary heritage. How do you respond?" "By asking them to taste the results before they judge, just as I had to taste the donut before I could dismiss it." Helga smiled. Cultural exchange does not destroy tradition. It enriches it. Austrian pastries did not disappear because we learned to make donuts. We simply added new tools to our repertoire. That evening, at a reception hosted by UNESCO, Helga found herself surrounded by former students, American program staff, and Austrian bakers whose businesses had thrived using the hybrid techniques. "Frau Weber," said a young German baker, "your story inspired our training program in Berlin. When my teachers wanted to reject American methods out of pride, I told them about the Viennese chef who was brave enough to admit she was wrong about donuts. That changed their minds. Later, Patterson joined Helga on a terrace overlooking the illuminated Eiffel Tower. "Louise," Helga said, they had long since moved to a first-name basis, "do you remember that first morning when I refused to even try your donuts?" I remember thinking, this stubborn Austrian is going to be a challenge. You broke through my arrogance with simple respect and honest food. You did not force me to like donuts. You just invited me to try them with an open mind. And you did, which took more courage than people realize. Admitting you are wrong about something you have publicly mocked is hard, especially for someone with your professional credentials. They stood in a comfortable silence, two women from different worlds who had become friends through the unlikely medium of fried dough with holes in the middle.